Flying in the modern day has become less of a luxury and more of an economic and financial enabler. If you've been to Europe or South Asia or even the US, you'll most likely be shocked at the sheer number of short-haul flyers, not traveling for a vacation per se, but just commuting to visit family or for work or maybe even to go to a wedding. In Europe, thanks to the rise of extremely low-cost carriers like Ryanair or EasyJet, you can fly round trip from London to Athens, Greece, a 3-hour and 40-minute flight for 122 Canadian dollars. Or you can fly from Tokyo to Singapore, a 7-hour and 20-minute journey, round trip between two highly wealthy and highly developed cities on an American full-service carrier for 548 Canadian dollars. While to fly within our own country on the highest demand route from Vancouver to Toronto on a full-service carrier like Air Canada costs about 506 Canadian dollars. A flight that's 2 hours shorter within the same country. While in the US, you can fly the highest demand route in that country, New York to Los Angeles, on 3 different airlines for 390 Canadian dollars. Even a short-haul flight from Toronto, the largest city in Canada, to the capital, just an hour away, costs 236 Canadian dollars. While in the US, copying the same scenario, you can fly from their most populous city, New York, to the capital, Washington DC, for a round-trip ticket of 153 Canadian dollars. This is the same story in Australia, where you can hop from their largest city, Melbourne, to Canberra, the capital, for $161. In fact, you can fly from Toronto to Washington DC for $236. So this means even though we're paying all the customs and US security fees we discussed in the previous video, it costs the same to fly to the US capital as it does our own. This is symbolic of the Canadian economy, where it's effectively cheaper to spend money in other countries than our own economy. And this is assuming that the service we receive on our Canadian carriers matches that of foreign competitors. If you watch the news, there are many embarrassing incidents involving customer service mishaps, safety issues, and just plain insanity. Like the time a WestJet flight was delayed for 60 hours, leaving 264 Toronto-bound passengers stranded in the UK for 2.5 days. Or the time 2 Air Transat flights were diverted to Ottawa to avoid weather in Toronto-Montreal, where passengers were stuck on the tarmac without food, water, or even air conditioning for up to 6 hours. This incident was so bad that Transport Canada slapped Air Transat with a nearly $300,000 fine. Or should we bring up the incident where Sunwing passengers were essentially held hostage at their vacation destination for 29 hours, getting delayed after delay. After they got back, they had to wait 10 days to receive their baggage and luggage. Or the time that a Porter airline customer was threatened with arrest for recording a video of poor customer service they were receiving, and they were threatened that they have to delete it or face police action. Despite the horror stories that we hear, that can come from any airline. We can't just blame our airlines and solely point the finger at them. Having $100 million machines flying at thousands of kilometers an hour with explosive fuel and hundreds of human lives at 30,000 feet is an incredibly complex and logistically difficult industry. For the sheer safety, if not operational problems like weather or mechanical failure. Things will go wrong, and if anyone has traveled before, with the security check-in, packing, waiting at gates, only to be cramped into a tiny seat with 300 other people, it's safe to say that the airline industry is one of the few industries where your customers show up stressed and pissed off. However, this doesn't excuse the sheer and utter embarrassment that Air Canada has been to us as Canadians. All the previous airlines I stated are more or less discount or regional carriers, which can excuse their less than stellar service, as most of their flights are domestic short haul. However, if you want to fly to most places on Earth directly from your hometown of Vancouver or Toronto, you will at some point have to fly Air Canada for terrible customer service. To say that Air Canada's customer service is trash would be an insult to the waste management industry. There's probably not been a single airline on the face of the earth that has as bad customer service as Air Canada. Although the airline has made improvements recently in terms of new planes and service, it's still an absolute embarrassment to the Canadian public.
Canadian pilots have long been focused on the issue of fatigue. Now the questions ring louder than ever. Are they being pushed to dangerous limits?
It would be fine if prices were high and service low, as long as their safety record was on par with that of Australian carrier Qantas. We're not even going to go into detail of the mention of number of crashes and incidents in the past few years, ignoring the decades of abysmal service. We'll just take a look at the past year. Starting in July of 2017, an Air Canada jet nearly landed on a taxiway full of planes ready to take off. It came within 50 feet of striking one of the aircraft. If the pilot didn't pull up at the last minute, this would have been the worst air crash disaster in human history. This wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't followed up again by another Air Canada plane at the same San Francisco airport, landing against repeated orders of air traffic control to go around.
81 go around. Canada 781 go around. Air Canada 781 go around. Canada 781 go around. Canada 781 go around.
And as if this wasn't bad enough, within a same month stretch, an Air Canada 787 entered the wrong taxiway at Tokyo Narita Airport and was stranded for hours, shutting down one of the airport's runways. Or it could be the security incident that leaked 20,000 users' data. Or it could be the Air Canada flight that was flying just from Toronto to Ottawa that was delayed for hours during a heat wave on the tarmac with no air conditioning running during record humidity. Not to mention a long, well-known issue of pilot fatigue. There are numerous recorded incidents where pilots have completely fallen asleep in the cockpit for over an hour. You can watch this special W5 report that goes into detail the perils that pilots face having to fly commercial aircraft with little to no sleep, and often have to be on call and have schedule changes with little to no notice. And this just isn't the fault of Air Canada, it's the regulation. Transport Canada only requires 2 pilots to be on board for transoceanic flights, let's say from Toronto to London Heathrow, while if you're flying on an American carrier, 3 pilots are required for all transatlantic flights. And none of this includes the Aeroplan fiasco, the obtuse, arbitrarily smaller carry-on size restriction that is only exclusive to Canadian carriers, or the constant rise of checked baggage fees. It's fine for WestJet and Air Transat to get away with this sort of behavior, but Air Canada is a flag, full-service carrier. They carry the nation's flag right on their plane, and yet paying full price, most Canadians and even visitors get treated with absolute disrespect and appalling behavior, where most other flagship carriers of other countries are a thing of pride, like Dubai has Emirates with their absolutely gorgeous interiors, Singapore Airlines with their phenomenal service, and even in the US, JetBlue is really stepping up their game. Being a discount airline for short-haul flights, but having planes that look like this? Want to know what the irony is? WestJet and JetBlue were founded by the same person. So literally, the same man can open up 2 different airlines in 2 different countries and get a radically different result. So it's not genetic, it's the environment. In the modern day and age, there's just no excuse for abysmal service and pricing, especially when given the chance. Canadians will almost always fly with foreign airlines whenever possible. However, right here at home, we're held hostage to settle for, with at best, meh service. This is one of the reasons why the vast majority of commuters in this country take a car, a less efficient, less reliable, and in every sense, more dangerous, polluting form of travel. Let's say you have a job interview in Toronto, but you live in Ottawa. How are you going to get there? You will almost always drive, which costs fuel, insurance, wear and tear on the vehicle, not to mention the cost of the actual vehicle itself, whether it's a beater or financed, leased, or it's just completely owned outright. Not to mention the risk of spending 5 hours behind the wheel, adding to the traffic and potential accidents when you could have flown over to your destination in 1 hour. So it's easy to see that we're not getting good service, good value, and for the most part, we're not even safer than most other airlines. We're actually worse off. So what is the solution to all of this? Well, the simple answer to this question is more competition. If Canada and Transport Canada eliminates airport rents, opens our borders to foreign airlines, for example allowing for a Virgin Air Canada or an EasyJet of our own. This is actually what occurred in Australia when Virgin was allowed to open a branch in Australia called Virgin Australia, offering discounted flights within, to, and from Australia. This was enough of an economic threat that Qantas, yes, the flag carrier of Australia, founded Jetstar Airways, their low-cost answer to Virgin Australia, which then prompted Virgin Australia to buy up a Singaporean discount carrier and renaming it to Tiger Air. And since it was owned by Virgin Australia, it could compete and operate inside Australia as a domestic airline. It allowed for 3 new airlines to sprout up, where previously there was just one giant monopoly. However, unless the Canadian government passes Bill C-49, which allow foreign companies and foreign investors to buy up Canadian airlines or even start local Canadian airlines, as long as the ownership is up to 49%. This will allow more competitive low-cost offerings, and just the mere threat of this bill has motivated WestJet to open up Swoop Airlines that takes advantage of lesser used airports near major population centers like Hamilton instead of Toronto Pearson or Abbotsford Airport instead of Vancouver. However, until this is hopefully passed, we will continue to be bogged down by companies like Air Canada, as Canada, despite producing billions of barrels of oil, despite producing commercial aircraft ourselves, and despite having millions of square kilometers of wide open skies, we still have an abysmal air travel sector. Pretty much every possible perfect combination of circumstances and ingredients to have an ultra cheap and efficient airline sector, we still lack one key ingredient: competition. And we will continue to remain a country dependent on selling raw resources to other countries, only to buy back the finished goods and services, as we simply do not have the proper incentives to force innovation and progress that's needed in countries not blessed with such resources like Singapore and Japan,